The rain fell softly on the glass dome that covered the Stellar Heights restaurant in Neo-Tokyo. Lisa Chen wiped down table 7 for the third time that evening and checked her watch. The important dinner meeting was supposed to start at 8 and it was already 10 minutes past. She had worked at this fancy restaurant for 2 years while studying at the university, but tonight felt different. The manager had told all the staff that very important people would be dining here, and they needed to be extra careful. The restaurant sat on the top floor of the tallest building in the city. Through the clear dome ceiling, guests could see the stars and sometimes the big ships that came from other planets. Lisa always loved looking up at those ships and wondering what kinds of people lived on them. She was studying to become a translator for different alien species and dreamed of working with beings from other worlds someday. The first guests arrived at 8:15. 3 tall figures walked through the main entrance and Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat. She had seen pictures of Zephyrians in her textbooks, but never in real life. They looked like they were made of living crystal that glowed with soft blue light from inside. The light moved in patterns across their transparent bodies like water flowing under ice. They wore simple white robes that seemed to float around them as they moved. The hostess led the 3 Zephyrians to the large round table in the center of the restaurant. Lisa noticed that they did not speak out loud to each other. Instead, the light patterns in their bodies flashed quickly back and forth. She remembered from her classes that this was how they really talked to each other. The universal translators that most aliens wore could turn their light language into words that humans could understand, but Lisa wondered if something got lost in translation. Few minutes later, the human delegation arrived. Lisa recognized Richard Hayes from the news. He was the head of Terra Industries and one of the richest men on Earth. With him came Susan Parker, who worked for the government as a diplomat, and Captain John Miller, who wore his military uniform with lots of shiny medals. They looked confident and smiled as they shook hands with each other before approaching the Zephyrian table. The meeting began with polite greetings. The Zephyrians had small devices clipped to their robes that spoke in mechanical voices when their body lights flashed. Richard Hayes talked about how happy humans were to work with the Zephyrian Commerce Guild. Susan Parker mentioned cultural exchange programs, and Captain Miller discussed security arrangements for the proposed mining operations. Lisa brought water and bread to the table and tried not to stare at the aliens. Up close, she could see that their crystal bodies had tiny facets like diamonds that split the light into rainbows. The patterns that moved through them were more complex than anything she had studied in school. Fast pulses of bright white light mixed with slower waves of blue and green. Sometimes all 3 Zephyrians would flash the same pattern at exactly the same time. As she walked back to get their drink orders, Lisa noticed an elderly Japanese man sitting alone at table 12 in the corner. He was small and thin with gray hair and wore an expensive-looking dark suit. He had ordered the most costly meal on the menu but barely touched his food. Instead, he seemed to be watching the big meeting at the center table. When Lisa approached him to refill his tea, he smiled politely but said nothing. She tried to speak to him in English, but he just shook his head and pointed to himself, saying something in Japanese that she could not understand. The main course was served at 9:30. Lisa carried heavy silver platters of the restaurant's famous dishes to both tables. The Zephyrians did not eat solid food like humans. Instead, they had special drinks that looked like liquid starlight. The human delegates ate and talked while the aliens flashed their light patterns and listened to their translator devices speak the words in English. As the evening went on, Lisa began to notice something strange. When the Zephyrians talked to the humans, their light patterns were slow and simple, but when they turned away from the humans to talk just to each other, the patterns became much faster and more complicated. The translator devices could not keep up with these quick private conversations. They would beep softly and then remain silent while the aliens flashed rapidly at each other. During one of these private conversations, Lisa was standing close enough to see the patterns clearly. She had spent the last 3 years studying Zephyrian light language in her advanced classes and could understand some basic concepts. What she saw made her stomach feel cold. The patterns were not about mining rights or trade agreements. They were about something called contamination protocols and forced relocation procedures. The old Japanese man at table 12 was also watching these private conversations. Lisa noticed that his eyes followed every light pattern with sharp attention. He was not reading a menu or looking at his phone like most people would. He was studying the aliens like a scientist studying specimens in a laboratory. When one of the Zephyrians flashed a particularly complex sequence, The old man's eyes narrowed and he leaned forward, slightly. At 10:15, the Zephyrians and humans were discussing the details of mining operations on 3 human colony worlds. Richard Hayes was excited about the profits, and Susan Parker talked about friendship between species. Captain Miller asked technical questions about security. The translator devices turned the alien light patterns into words about fair trade and mutual benefit and respect for human territorial rights. But during a pause in the formal discussion, Lisa saw the 3 Zephyrians have another rapid private conversation. Their bodies flashed with urgent patterns that the translators could not process. Lisa managed to catch enough of the light language to understand words like deception and conquest and toxic waste. She felt her hands shake as she poured more wine for the human delegates who had no idea what was really being discussed, just a few feet away from them. The old Japanese man had stopped pretending to eat his dinner. He was now openly staring at the alien delegation, and Lisa could see that he understood something was wrong too. When their eyes met across the restaurant, he gave her a small nod as if he knew exactly what she had seen. Lisa realized that this quiet dinner was about to become something much more dangerous, and that she might be the only person in the room who could do something about it. Lisa's hands trembled as she served the second course to the negotiation table. The Zephyrians had ordered their special liquid meals that sparkled like melted diamonds in crystal glasses. The human delegates were enjoying the restaurant's famous grilled fish with exotic vegetables from the colony worlds. Everyone seemed relaxed and happy with how the talks were going. Richard Hayes was telling the aliens about Terra Industries' expansion plans. He used big gestures with his hands as he described new settlements on distant planets. Susan Parker nodded and added details about cultural exchange programs that would help humans and Zephyrians learn from each other. Captain Miller showed them pictures on his tablet of the peaceful mining equipment that would be used. The lead Zephyrian's translator device spoke, in its flat mechanical voice, about mutual prosperity and long-term partnership. The other 2 aliens flashed supporting patterns that the machines turned into words of agreement and enthusiasm. To anyone listening, it sounded like the perfect trade deal that would benefit both species for generations. But when the humans looked down at their food or talked among themselves, the Zephyrians had very different conversations. Lisa was clearing empty plates when she caught another burst of their rapid light language. This time she understood much more than before. The patterns spoke of something called Operation Crystal Harvest and mentioned 17 previous worlds where they had used the same tactics. The alien in the middle was the leader, and his patterns were the most complex. Lisa's 3 years of studying their language helped her catch fragments of his meaning. He was explaining how they would set up mining operations that would pump toxic chemicals into the groundwater. The chemicals would be harmless to Zephyrian crystal bodies but deadly to human biology. Within 5 years, all the human colonists would be forced to evacuate, and the Zephyrians could claim entire planets instead of just mining rights. Lisa nearly dropped the stack of plates she was carrying. This was not a trade negotiation at all. It was a plan for slow genocide that would look like an accident. The Zephyrians had done this before to other species, and now they wanted to do it to humans. The worst part was that the human delegates trusted them completely. She looked over at the old Japanese man at table 12. He had barely touched his expensive dinner and was still watching the aliens with intense focus. When the Zephyrians had their private light conversations, his eyes tracked every pattern. Lisa began to suspect that he understood their language too, but she was not sure why he was not doing anything about it. During the next course, the Zephyrians became even more careless with their private discussions. They seemed to think that no human could possibly understand their light language. The leader told the others about how stupid humans were compared to other species they had tricked. He flashed patterns that meant something like inferior mammals who believe anything they are told. The second Zephyrian added details about the toxic mining process. The chemicals they would use were called crystal dissolvents, and they would seep into soil and water sources across entire continents. Human children would be affected first with breathing problems and skin diseases. Then adults would start getting sick. The medical symptoms would look like natural illnesses caused by living on alien worlds. The third alien expressed concern about human scientists who might figure out what was happening. The leader's response made Lisa feel sick to her stomach. He flashed patterns that meant they had contingency plans for dealing with human researchers who asked too many questions. They would arrange accidents or blame the illnesses on other causes like radiation from space or mutations in local plants. Meanwhile, the human delegates continued their happy discussion about the benefits of interspecies cooperation. Richard Hayes was calculating profit margins and talking about quarterly earnings reports. Susan Parker was planning cultural festivals where humans and Zephyrians could share art and music. Captain Miller was discussing security protocols to protect the mining operations from space pirates and other threats. None of them had any idea that the real threat was sitting right across the table from them, smiling and lying. With every flash of light, the translator devices only processed the simple diplomatic patterns that the aliens showed to humans. The complex private conversations that revealed their true intentions were completely hidden. Lisa realized she had to do something, but she was just a waitress. Who would believe her if she tried to tell them that she could understand alien languages better than million-credit translation machines? She had no proof except her own knowledge and no authority to interrupt an important diplomatic meeting. She walked over to table 12 where the old Japanese man was sitting. He looked up at her with sharp, intelligent eyes, and she could tell he was thinking about the same problem she was. She tried to speak to him again in English, but he still acted like he did not understand. However, when she said the word Zephyrian in English, he tilted his head slightly and his expression changed. Lisa decided to take a risk. She had learned some Japanese from her grandmother, who had lived in Japan before moving to America. She spoke quietly in basic Japanese, asking if he understood what the aliens were really saying. For a moment, he stared at her in surprise. Then he glanced around to make sure no one was watching and answered in perfect English with no accent at all. He told her his name was Hiroshi Yamamoto, and that he had been tracking this group of criminal Zephyrians for 8 months. He explained that he was not just a rich businessman, but also a scientist who had invented new types of translation technology. His company had developed quantum computers that could process alien languages much faster than normal machines. He had been using these computers to monitor Zephyrian communications across the galaxy. Hiroshi said that this group of aliens was wanted by their own government for crimes against 17 different species. They were not official representatives of the Zephyrian Commerce Guild, but criminals who had stolen identity codes and forged diplomatic credentials. They had been traveling from world to world, posing as legitimate traders while planning ecological warfare against entire civilizations. He explained that he had been waiting for them to reveal their plans in a place where he could record evidence that would hold up in Galactic Council courts. The restaurant's security cameras could not detect Zephyrian light language, but his hidden quantum scanner could translate and document everything they said. He just needed more time to gather enough proof to convict them. Lisa felt a mixture of relief and fear. She was glad that someone else knew about the danger, but worried about what would happen when the aliens realized they had been discovered. Hiroshi told her they had to be very careful, because the Zephyrians would become violent if they suspected their plan was compromised. He asked Lisa to help him by continuing to serve their table, normally while his scanner recorded their private conversations. As Lisa walked back toward the kitchen, she could see that the formal negotiation was entering its final stages. The humans were getting ready to sign preliminary agreements that would give the criminal aliens access to 3 colony worlds with millions of innocent people. She had perhaps 1 hour left to help Hiroshi gather the evidence they needed to stop a disaster that would make human history's worst genocides look small by comparison. The restaurant erupted into chaos as Lisa continued speaking in flashing Zephyrian light language. The 3 alien criminals were backing away from the table, while their bodies blazed with panic signals that made them look like living emergency beacons. The human delegates stared in complete confusion as their waitress somehow communicated with beings from another world using technology they had never seen before. Richard Hayes stood up so quickly that he knocked over his coffee cup and demanded to know what was happening. The lead Zephyrian was flashing desperate warning patterns to his companions while trying to reach the emergency communicator hidden in his robes. Susan Parker was shouting for hotel security as she realized the peaceful negotiation had become something dangerous and unpredictable. Lisa ignored the chaos around her and focused on the second Zephyrian, who seemed less prepared for confrontation than his leader. She asked him directly about the crystal dissolvent chemicals and how many human children would die from the poisoned water supplies. The alien's response was automatic and honest before he realized what he was saying. His light patterns described the slow death process that would take 5 years to kill entire colonies. "Captain, Miller heard enough to understand that something terrible was being discussed even though he could not read the light language himself. He activated his military communicator and called for backup while moving to block the restaurant's main exit. The Zephyrians found themselves trapped between an angry human military officer and a waitress who somehow knew all their secrets. Hiroshi Yamamoto rose from his corner table and walked toward the confrontation while pulling out a device that looked like an advanced tablet computer. He spoke in clear English with no trace of accent, and announced that he had been recording the entire conversation, including all the private Zephyrian communications that the official translators had missed. The evidence would be transmitted to Galactic Council authorities within minutes. The lead Zephyrian realized that their deception had been completely exposed and decided to try one final desperate lie. His translator device spoke words about misunderstanding and cultural confusion, while his actual light patterns told his companions to prepare for violent escape. Lisa caught the real meaning and warned the humans that the aliens were about to attack. Richard Hayes was beginning to understand that he had been negotiating with criminals instead of legitimate traders. He demanded an explanation for what Lisa had discovered and why his expensive translation equipment had failed to detect the deception. Hiroshi stepped forward and introduced himself as the inventor of quantum translation technology that was far more advanced than anything currently available to human diplomats. Susan Parker was frantically calling her superiors in the government to report that the trade agreement had been compromised by alien criminals. She was struggling to explain how a restaurant waitress had uncovered a conspiracy that professional diplomats and intelligence services had completely missed. Her political career was flashing before her eyes as she realized the magnitude of the disaster they had almost signed. The second Zephyrian made a mistake by trying to communicate privately with the leader about their escape plan. Lisa intercepted the light patterns and translated them aloud for the humans to hear. The alien was describing how they could kill everyone in the restaurant and escape in their hidden ship before authorities arrived. The casual way he discussed mass murder shocked even the experienced military officer. Captain Miller immediately declared a security emergency and sealed the restaurant while calling for additional military support. He ordered everyone to move away from the aliens while keeping them under close observation. Hiroshi warned that Zephyrians were much stronger than humans despite their fragile crystal appearance, and could become extremely dangerous when cornered. The third criminal tried a different approach by appealing directly to human greed. His translator spoke about how the mining operations could still proceed with proper safety measures, and that the profits would be enormous for everyone involved. He offered bribes of advanced alien technology and exclusive trade privileges if the humans would agree to forget what they had learned. Lisa translated his real light language, which revealed that he was lying about safety measures and planning to kill the human delegates as soon as they signed new contracts. She also discovered that this group of criminals had stolen advanced weapons from their own military and were prepared to destroy entire human settlements if their plans were discovered. The situation was much more dangerous than anyone had realized. Hiroshi's quantum computer finished processing the recorded evidence and transmitted complete files to both human authorities and the legitimate Zephyrian government. He explained that these three aliens were wanted criminals who had been hiding from their own law enforcement for over 2 years. They had committed genocide against 17 different species, and Terra Industries had been their next target. Richard Hayes was staring at the contracts he had been about to sign and calculating how many human lives would have been lost because of his desire for profit. The mining rights would have given the criminals access to 3 colony worlds with a combined population of 12 million people, including hundreds of thousands of children. He realized that his signature would have made him responsible for the largest mass murder in human history. The lead Zephyrian made one final, desperate attempt to escape by activating a hidden weapon that looked like a piece of jewelry but projected deadly energy beams. Captain Miller tackled Susan Parker to get her out of the line of fire while shouting for everyone to take cover behind the heavy restaurant tables. The alien's crystal body blazed with combat patterns as he prepared to kill every witness in the room. Lisa found herself caught in the open between the armed alien and the rest of the humans. She could see the energy weapon charging up and knew she had only seconds before it fired. Hiroshi was shouting warnings about Zephyrian combat tactics while trying to reach his own emergency beacon. The peaceful dinner party had become a battlefield where the future of human civilization hung in the balance. The restaurant's lights flickered as the alien weapon reached full power and prepared to fire its first deadly blast. Lisa realized that her knowledge of Zephyrian culture might be the only thing that could save everyone in the room. She began speaking in the most formal light language she knew, using patterns that meant something like ancient ritual challenge of honor. The alien hesitated for just a moment as he tried to process what she was saying. That moment of confusion was enough for Captain Miller to draw his own weapon and take aim at the criminal who was threatening innocent people. The standoff had reached its climax, and the next few seconds would determine whether the conspiracy would be exposed or whether everyone who knew the truth would die in a remote restaurant while the galaxy's greatest crime continued across the stars. The energy weapon in the lead Zephyrian's hand hummed with deadly power as Lisa continued speaking in formal challenge patterns that confused the alien criminal. Captain Miller had his military sidearm drawn, but was hesitating to fire because he did not know if human weapons could harm crystal beings or if shooting would make them more dangerous. Hiroshi was crawling toward his emergency beacon while Richard Hayes and Susan Parker hid behind an overturned table. Lisa's desperate gamble with ritual language bought them precious seconds as the Zephyrian tried to understand why a human was using ceremonial patterns reserved for their ancient warrior caste. His translator device was malfunctioning under the stress of combat mode and could not process the complex cultural references she was making. The confusion made him pause long enough for help to arrive from an unexpected source. The restaurant's kitchen staff had heard the shouting and crash of furniture. The head chef was a former military cook who recognized the sound of combat and activated the building's emergency systems. Steel security barriers began sliding down over the windows, while automated distress signals went out to police and military units across the city. The criminal aliens were now trapped inside with their victims. The second Zephyrian realized that their escape routes were being cut off and made his own desperate move. He smashed through the restaurant's main door using his crystal body like a battering ram, while his companions provided covering fire with their energy weapons. Beams of superheated plasma scorched the walls and ceiling. As the humans dove for cover behind heavy furniture and decorative pillars, Captain Miller returned fire with his military weapon, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the aliens' transparent bodies without causing damage. He cursed and called for armor-piercing rounds while rolling behind the bar to avoid the energy beams that were turning expensive bottles of wine into clouds of superheated vapor. Human weapons technology was not designed to fight crystal beings. Hiroshi finally reached his emergency beacon and activated a signal that would bring help from both human and alien authorities. He shouted over the sound of weapons fire that legitimate Zephyrian peacekeepers were already en route and would arrive within 30 minutes. The criminals had to be kept alive until then so they could face trial for their crimes against 17 worlds. Lisa found herself pinned down near the kitchen entrance as energy beams cut through the air above her head. She could see that the third alien was trying to flank around behind the humans while his leader kept them busy with direct fire. She used her light language device to shout warnings in Zephyrian about his movements, hoping to distract him long enough for the humans to reposition. The flanking maneuver worked better than the alien expected because Lisa's warning made him think there were other Zephyrians in the restaurant working against him. He turned toward her position and demanded in light language to know who she was working for and how many others were hidden in the building. His paranoia was making him see threats that did not exist. Richard Hayes was using his business tablet to coordinate with building security while Susan Parker called her government contacts to request immediate military support. They were both beginning to understand that this was much bigger than a failed trade negotiation. If these criminals escaped, they would continue their genocide campaign against other human colonies and no one would know to stop them. The lead alien's energy weapon was overheating from continuous fire and he was forced to pause to let it cool down. Captain Miller used this opportunity to advance toward a better position, while Lisa provided distraction by continuing to speak in confusing ritual patterns. The alien was becoming frustrated by his inability to understand why a human knew sacred Zephyrian ceremonies. Hiroshi revealed another surprise by pulling a second device. from his jacket that projected a holographic display showing the exact locations of all three criminals. His quantum scanners could track their crystal bodies even when they tried to hide behind solid objects. He shared this information with Captain Miller, who finally had targeting data for enemies he could not easily see. The second alien made a critical error by trying to use his energy weapon to blast through the security barriers over the windows. The barrier material was designed to withstand military assault and reflected the energy beam back at him. His own weapon's power surge overloaded his crystal body's internal systems, and he collapsed unconscious onto the restaurant floor. Lisa saw her chance and activated her light language device to demand the surrender of the remaining two criminals in the name of the legitimate Zephyrian government. She used every formal authority pattern she had learned in her studies, while Hiroshi's holographic display showed that Zephyrian peacekeeping ships were now entering Earth's atmosphere and would dock at the building within minutes. The third alien panicked when he realized that legitimate authorities from his own species were coming to arrest him. He made a desperate charge toward the humans, hoping to take hostages before the peacekeepers arrived. Captain Miller met him halfway with a tackle that sent both of them crashing into a table loaded with expensive dishes and silverware. The crystal alien was stronger than a human, but Captain Miller was trained in close combat and knew how to use leverage and momentum against larger opponents. They rolled across the floor while the alien tried to grab the fallen energy weapon, and the human tried to pin his arms. Lisa shouted tactical advice in Zephyrian about pressure points that might work on crystal anatomy. The lead criminal saw his last companion struggling with the human and made a final desperate decision. He turned his overheated energy weapon toward the restaurant's main support beam and prepared to bring down the entire building rather than face capture. If he could not escape, he would kill everyone who knew about Operation Crystal Harvest and continue the genocide campaign from a different base. Hiroshi realized what was happening and threw his quantum scanner device at the alien's head while shouting for everyone to evacuate immediately. The device struck the crystal being just as he fired, causing the energy beam to miss the support beam and blast a hole in the ceiling instead. Chunks of concrete and twisted metal rained down on the restaurant floor. Outside the building, Zephyrian peacekeeping ships were landing on the roof, while human military units surrounded the ground-level exits. The legitimate authorities had arrived, but they were still minutes away from reaching the restaurant floor where the battle was continuing. Lisa looked up through the hole in the ceiling and saw stars shining through the night sky along with the running lights of alien ships that represented hope for justice. Captain Miller finally managed to subdue the third criminal by using a chokehold that cut off whatever served as circulation in crystal anatomy. The alien went limp and his body stopped glowing as he lost consciousness. That left only the leader, who was struggling to recharge his weapon for one final shot that would collapse the building and kill everyone inside. The race was between the recharging energy weapon and the approaching peacekeepers who could end this standoff before more people died. Lisa continued using her light language to try distracting the desperate criminal, while Hiroshi coordinated with the incoming authorities using his quantum communication systems. The next 60 seconds would determine whether justice would be served or whether the genocide conspiracy would claim even more victims. The hole in the restaurant ceiling suddenly filled with brilliant blue light as Zephyrian peacekeeping officers descended through the opening on platforms of crystallized energy. Lisa had never seen legitimate Zephyrian law enforcement before and was amazed by how different they looked from the criminals. Their crystal bodies were larger and more complex, with intricate patterns that spoke of authority and honor rather than greed and deception. The lead peacekeeper wore ceremonial armor that looked like it was carved from a single enormous diamond. Her light patterns identified her with a name that roughly translated as Truth Seeker who illuminates darkness. She immediately assessed the situation with the quick efficiency of someone who had dealt with these particular criminals before. Her first light flash was a command for all humans to move away from the combat zone. The criminal leader saw the peacekeepers arriving and knew his desperate plan had failed. He turned his partially recharged energy weapon toward Truth Seeker, but she was ready for his attack. Her own enforcement tools were far more advanced than the stolen military equipment the criminals carried. A web of crystalline energy surrounded the criminal and neutralized his weapon before he could fire. Lisa watched in fascination as the legitimate Zephyrians used their light language to conduct what was clearly an official arrest procedure. The patterns were formal and legal, rather than the casual conversation she had learned to understand. Truth-Seeker was reading the criminal his rights under Galactic Council law, while other peacekeepers secured the scene and checked on the unconscious aliens. Captain Miller was helped to his feet by human medics who had followed the peacekeepers into the building. He had several cuts from the broken dishes and a bruised shoulder from tackling the crystal alien, but no serious injuries. He immediately began coordinating with Truth-Seeker to ensure that all evidence was properly preserved for the upcoming trial. Hiroshi approached the lead peacekeeper and introduced himself in fluent Zephyrian light language that impressed even Lisa with its complexity and formal precision. He explained his role in tracking the criminals and provided copies of all the recorded evidence his quantum scanners had gathered. Truth-Seeker expressed gratitude for his patient investigation that had finally led to their capture. Richard Hayes and Susan Parker emerged from behind their overturned table, looking shaken, but determined to understand exactly what had happened to their trade negotiations. Truth-Seeker activated a translation device that was far more sophisticated than the ones the criminals had used. Her explanation of the genocide conspiracy left both humans speechless with horror at how close they had come to signing death warrants for millions of their own people. The second peacekeeper was examining the unconscious criminals and flashing diagnostic patterns that indicated they would recover from their injuries. All three would be taken to a Zephyrian detention facility to await trial before a Galactic Council tribunal. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and they would likely face life imprisonment or the equivalent punishment under Crystal being justice systems. Lisa found herself at the center of attention as Truth-Seeker approached her with patterns of curiosity and respect. The peacekeeper was amazed that a young human had learned enough Zephyrian language to expose the conspiracy when professional diplomats had been completely deceived. She asked how Lisa had acquired such advanced knowledge of their complex cultural communication. Through the sophisticated translation device, Lisa explained her studies in xenolinguistics and her dream of becoming a translator between species. Truth-Seeker listened carefully and then flashed patterns that meant something like great honor to one who builds bridges between worlds. She said that Lisa's courage and skill had prevented a disaster that would have damaged relations between humans and Zephyrians for generations. The restaurant was now filled with both human and alien investigators, documenting every detail of the crime scene. Hiroshi's quantum recordings were being analyzed by Galactic Council experts who were amazed by the technical quality of his evidence. The investigation would uncover the full scope of Operation Crystal Harvest and identify other potential victims across the galaxy. Truth-Seeker addressed all the humans present to explain the larger context of what had happened. The three criminals were part of a rogue faction that had been expelled from legitimate Zephyrian society over 50 years ago for advocating conquest and domination of other species. They had been hiding in the outer regions of the galaxy, committing genocide against smaller civilizations that could not defend themselves. The legitimate Zephyrian government had been searching for these criminals for decades, but they were experts at forging credentials and impersonating official trade delegations. Their plan to attack human colonies was particularly audacious because humans were well known throughout the galaxy as fierce defenders of their own people. Most species would have mounted massive retaliation campaigns if they had discovered the deception. Richard Hayes was struggling to process the magnitude of the disaster that had been prevented. Terra Industries would have been responsible for implementing the mining operations that killed 12 million people. His company's reputation would have been destroyed, and he personally would have faced charges of genocide under human law, even though he had been deceived by the aliens. Susan Parker was already planning the diplomatic response that would turn this near disaster into a triumph for human Zephyrian relations. The exposure of the criminal conspiracy would prove that humans could be trusted partners who would risk their own safety to protect both species from those who would exploit interstellar cooperation for evil purposes. Captain Miller was coordinating with his superiors to ensure that human military forces would assist in hunting down any other members of the criminal organization who might still be operating in human space. The peacekeeping operation would be a joint effort between human and Zephyrian law enforcement agencies. Truth-Seeker made a formal announcement that the legitimate Zephyrian government would establish a permanent embassy on Earth to ensure that such deceptions could never happen again. Cultural exchange programs would help both species learn to recognize and prevent similar crimes in the future. The criminals' plan to divide humans and Zephyrians had instead brought them closer together. Lisa was offered a full scholarship to study advanced xenolinguistics at the Galactic Council's premier university, along with guaranteed employment as an official translator between species. Her quick thinking and linguistic skills had not only saved millions of lives, but also opened new opportunities for peaceful cooperation between civilizations. As the criminals were led away in crystalline restraints that would prevent them from using their natural abilities to escape, Lisa reflected on how a simple dinner shift had changed the course of galactic history. The waitress who had started the evening worried about her university grades was now being hailed as a hero who had prevented genocide and strengthened the bonds between worlds. The investigation would continue for months as authorities tracked down the full extent of the criminal network and identified all 17 worlds where genocide had been committed. Justice would finally be served for countless victims who had died never knowing that their suffering was caused by deliberate evil rather than natural disasters or their own mistakes in choosing where to build their homes. 3 weeks after the incident at Stellar Heights restaurant, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the criminal conspiracy that had threatened human colonies. Lisa Chen sat in the witness gallery wearing the formal robes of an official translator as she prepared to give testimony that would help convict the 3 Zephyrian criminals. The courtroom was filled with representatives from dozens of species who had come to hear about the genocide plot. The trial had already revealed the shocking scope of Operation Crystal Harvest. Investigators had discovered evidence linking the criminals to the destruction of 17 different civilizations over a period of 30 years. Millions of beings had died from poisoned environments while the criminals claimed entire worlds for themselves. The pattern was always the same, with mining operations that appeared legitimate until it was too late to save the victims. Truth-Seeker, who illuminates darkness, served as the primary prosecutor and had spent weeks documenting every detail of the conspiracy. Hiroshi Yamamoto's quantum recordings provided irrefutable evidence of the criminals' private conversations about their plans to murder human colonists. The defense attorneys could only argue for mercy rather than innocence because the proof was overwhelming. Lisa's testimony focused on the linguistic evidence that had first exposed the deception. She explained to the tribunal how the criminals had used simple diplomatic patterns when speaking to humans while discussing mass murder in complex private conversations. Her knowledge of Zephyrian cultural references had allowed her to understand the true meaning behind seemingly innocent light displays. The lead judge was an ancient being from a species that looked like living trees with crystalline bark. Her voice resonated with harmonics that conveyed deep sadness as she described how the criminals had betrayed the trust that made peaceful interstellar cooperation possible. Their actions had damaged relationships between species and made future trade negotiations more difficult for everyone. Richard Hayes testified about how completely he had been deceived by the false credentials and forged documentation the criminals had presented. Terra Industries had conducted extensive background checks that all appeared to confirm the legitimacy of the Zephyrian Commerce Guild representatives. The criminals were experts at exploiting the trust that honest businesses placed in official diplomatic channels. Susan Parker's testimony revealed how government intelligence services had also been fooled by the sophisticated deception. The criminals had maintained fake identities for decades while slowly infiltrating legitimate trade organizations. They had even participated in cultural exchange programs to build credibility with their intended victims. Captain Miller described the combat capabilities the criminals had demonstrated and warned that other members of their organization might still be operating throughout the galaxy. Human military intelligence was working with peacekeeping forces from multiple species to track down any remaining cells of the criminal network. The trial also heard from survivors of the 17 destroyed worlds who had traveled across vast distances to see justice finally served. Their testimonies were heartbreaking accounts of entire civilizations that had slowly died without understanding why their environments had become poisonous. Children had suffered the most as the crystal dissolvent chemicals attacked developing nervous Systems. One survivor was an elderly being from a species that looked like walking flowers with petals that changed color based on emotion. She had lost her entire family to the slow poison and had spent 20 years believing that her people had simply chosen unsuitable worlds for colonization. Learning that their deaths were deliberate murder rather than tragic accident had been both devastating and liberating. The criminals showed no remorse during the proceedings and continued to flash defiant light patterns that claimed their actions were justified by Zephyrian superiority over other species. Their attitude convinced even their own defense attorneys that they were dangerous fanatics who would continue their crimes if given any opportunity to escape. Punishment Truth Seeker presented evidence that the criminal organization had been planning to expand their operations significantly after succeeding with human colonies. Documents found in their hidden bases described plans to target the core worlds of the Galactic Council itself. They intended to poison entire star systems and claim them for a new Zephyrian empire built on genocide. The tribunal reached its verdict after only 6 hours of deliberation. All 3 criminals were found guilty of genocide conspiracy and crimes against sapient life. The sentences were severe even by Galactic Council standards, with the leaders receiving life imprisonment in maximum security crystal prisons while their accomplices got 500 years each. More importantly, the trial established new protocols for interspecies trade negotiations that would prevent similar deceptions in the future. All diplomatic meetings would now require independent linguistic verification using technology based on Hiroshi's quantum translation systems. Cultural exchange programs would teach representatives from different species how to recognize deception in alien communication methods. Lisa was formally appointed as Earth's first Director of Xenolinguistic Security with responsibility for training human diplomats to detect alien deception. Her department would work closely with similar organizations established by other species to create a galaxy-wide network of linguistic experts who could spot criminal conspiracies before they succeeded. Hiroshi Yamamoto was awarded the highest civilian honor the Galactic Council could bestow on a non-government individual. His patient investigation and advanced technology had made it possible to finally capture criminals who had evaded justice for decades. He announced that his company would make quantum translation technology freely available to all council member species. The legitimate Zephyrian government established a memorial fund for the victims of the 17 destroyed worlds and pledged to spend the next century helping rebuild civilizations that could be restored. They also created an elite peacekeeping unit specifically trained to hunt down any remaining members of the criminal organization. Richard Hayes transformed Terra Industries into a leader in ethical interstellar business practices with new policies, requiring extensive verification of alien trading partners. The company's near miss with genocide had taught him that some prices were too high to pay even for enormous profits. His experiences made him a powerful advocate for business ethics in the galactic community. Susan Parker's diplomatic career flourished as she became known as the human representative who had helped expose the greatest criminal conspiracy in galactic history. Her work in establishing new security protocols for interspecies negotiations made her one of the most respected diplomats in council circles. Captain Miller was promoted to head of human interstellar security and tasked with coordinating anti-terrorism efforts with alien law enforcement agencies. His military experience in the restaurant battle had proven that humans could fight effectively against alien criminals when properly prepared and equipped. The restaurant itself became a monument to interspecies cooperation with a permanent exhibit describing how ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they chose to act on their principles. The hole in the ceiling was preserved as a reminder of how close the galaxy had come to losing faith in peaceful cooperation between species. As Lisa prepared to leave Earth for her advanced studies at the Galactic Council University, she reflected on how her knowledge of alien languages had changed from an academic interest into a tool for preventing genocide. Her grandmother's insistence that she learn about other cultures had literally saved millions of lives and strengthened the bonds between worlds. 1 year later, Lisa Chen stood in the same Stellar Heights restaurant, wearing the deep blue uniform of a certified galactic translator, as she prepared for another important diplomatic meeting. The hole in the ceiling had been repaired, but a crystal Sculpture now marked the spot where Zephyrian peacekeepers had descended to capture the criminals. The restaurant had become famous throughout the galaxy as the place where ordinary humans had prevented an interstellar genocide. The evening's negotiation involved a peaceful aquatic species called the Delphinians, who lived in vast underwater cities on ocean worlds. They had requested human assistance in developing new technologies for deep space exploration that would allow them to carry their water environments with them on long journeys. The cultural exchange would benefit both species while demonstrating the positive cooperation that had replaced the fear and suspicion caused by the criminal conspiracy. Lisa's role was very different from her previous job as a waitress. She now served as the primary linguistic monitor for all major diplomatic meetings on Earth, using advanced quantum translation equipment that could detect deception in any known alien communication method. Her success in exposing the Zephyrian criminals had made her the most trusted translator in the galactic community. The human delegation was led by Dr. Amanda Foster from the Colonial Development Agency, who specialized in building settlements that could support multiple species. With her came Professor Kevin Wright from the University of Mars, who had developed new theories about interstellar travel that interested the aquatic aliens. Captain Lisa's old friend John Miller provided security using protocols developed after the criminal incident. The Delphinian representatives arrived in environmental suits filled with their native ocean water that allowed them to breathe and communicate normally. Their leader was an elegant being whose name translated roughly as current that brings wisdom from deep places. She moved with fluid grace that reminded Lisa of watching dolphins swim in Earth's oceans. Unlike the criminal Zephyrians, these aliens were completely transparent in their communications and welcomed Lisa's linguistic monitoring as a sign of good faith. Current that brings wisdom explained that her people had heard about the restaurant incident and specifically requested Earth as a meeting location because they trusted human integrity in detecting alien deception. The negotiations proceeded smoothly, with both species sharing their knowledge freely and honestly. The Delphinians offered advanced water recycling technologies that could help human colonies on desert worlds, while humans provided quantum computing methods that would allow aquatic beings to navigate through space more efficiently. The cooperation benefited everyone involved without any hidden agendas or secret plans. Hiroshi Yamamoto attended the meeting as an observer and technical consultant. His quantum translation company had grown into the largest xenolinguistics corporation in the galaxy, with offices on dozens of worlds. His technology was now standard equipment for all interspecies negotiations and had prevented several other criminal conspiracies from succeeding. During the dinner break, Lisa was approached by Truth Seeker who illuminates darkness, who had traveled from the Zephyrian homeworld to attend the meeting as part of an ongoing cultural exchange program. The peacekeeper had become a close friend and mentor to Lisa during the year of investigations that followed the criminal trials. Truth Seeker reported that the hunt for remaining members of the criminal organization was finally complete. The last 3 fugitives had been captured on a remote mining world where they were attempting to restart their genocide operations against a species of crystalline being similar to Zephyrians. The entire network was now either imprisoned or dead and could never threaten innocent civilizations again. The legitimate Zephyrian government had used the crisis as an opportunity to reform their entire society and eliminate the supremacist attitudes that had created the criminal faction in the first place. New education programs taught young Zephyrians about the value of other species and the importance of cooperation rather than domination. The changes would prevent similar criminals from emerging in future generations. Lisa's work had expanded far beyond simple translation as she became involved in developing new methods for building trust between species that had never encountered each other before. Her research into xenolinguistic security had identified dozens of ways that criminals could exploit communication barriers to deceive their victims. The protocols she developed were now taught at diplomatic academies throughout the galaxy. The aquatic negotiations concluded with a comprehensive agreement that established permanent research stations where humans and Delphinians could work together on projects that benefited both species. The friendship that developed during the Adair talks led to cultural exchange programs that would continue for decades and educational partnerships that would help young beings from both civilizations learn about each other As the Delphinian delegation prepared to depart, Current That Brings Wisdom presented Lisa with a gift of rare pearls that grew only in the deepest ocean trenches of their homeworld. The pearls were said to bring wisdom and clarity to those who possessed them, which the aquatic leader said Lisa had already demonstrated in abundance. Richard Hayes had used his experience with the criminal conspiracy to transform Terra Industries into a model of ethical business practices that other corporations tried to imitate. His company now specialized in building settlements that could support multiple species together rather than exploiting resources for purely human benefit. The near disaster had taught him that sustainable cooperation was more profitable than short-term exploitation. Susan Parker had been promoted to head of Human Galactic Relations and was widely considered one of the most effective diplomats in Council history. Her policies had helped establish Earth as the preferred location for difficult negotiations because other species trusted human integrity and expertise in detecting deception. Her career had been made by the crisis that could have destroyed it. Captain Miller's security innovations had prevented dozens of other criminal attempts to infiltrate legitimate diplomatic meetings. His protocols were now standard procedure for any negotiation involving species that had not worked together before. The military experience he gained fighting crystal beings had proven invaluable in developing defenses against other exotic alien threats. The restaurant itself had become a symbol of successful interspecies cooperation with visitors from across the galaxy coming to see where ordinary humans had prevented extraordinary evil. The staff took pride in serving beings from dozens of different worlds, while maintaining the same high standards that had impressed the original Zephyrian criminals. Lisa's grandmother had lived to see her granddaughter become famous throughout the galaxy for using the linguistic skills that had started with childhood lessons about respecting other cultures. The elderly woman often said that she had always known Lisa would do something important with her gift for languages, even though she had never imagined it would involve preventing interstellar genocide. As the evening ended, and the last diplomatic documents were signed, Lisa reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrifying night when she first heard aliens planning mass murder. Her knowledge of Zephyrian light language had transformed from an academic curiosity into a tool for saving lives and building bridges between civilizations. The galaxy was now a safer place because ordinary people had chosen to act when they witnessed injustice. Lisa's courage as a waitress had inspired beings from hundreds of different species to speak up when they saw crimes being planned or committed. The conspiracy that was meant to divide civilizations had instead brought them closer together in their determination to protect the innocent and punish those who would exploit trust for evil purposes. Standing in the restaurant where it all began, Lisa looked up through the repaired ceiling at the stars that now represented not distant unknowns, but friends and allies working together to build a better future for all sapient life. The universe was vast and full of wonders that could only be discovered through cooperation and mutual respect between species that had learned to trust each other despite their differences.